Welcome to the Pediatric Epilepsy Podcast. Always excited to be here with you. Today's episode has been in the making for quite some time and addresses one of the biggest needs, not only in our Mickey's Miracle epilepsy community, but for all parents with medically complex children. Joining us today is Dario Herrera, Director of Donor Outreach and Community Relations, and my wonderful husband, Gabriel Grease. And we'll be diving into the Care for Caregivers mental health program. Let's dive right in and start with, what is the Care for Caregivers mental health program? Dario?
Well, I think most importantly, it's a recognition that there are mental health challenges associated with acute mental health challenges that are associated with providing for a child that is fighting for his or her life. Certainly, mental health challenges all of us in different ways, in different walks of life, different seasons of life, different journeys of life. But I think there's a recognition, at least based on my experience with Mickey's Miracles and working with the families that we have the honor to work with, and having observed both of you through multiple years of working with families and caring for Mickie, that it's time we have a deeper conversation. It's time we provide resources that aren't readily available to parents. It's time we destigmatize this. It's time we really dive into it and understand, what parents need. How can we support them? And I think, yes, there's going to be Zoom sessions that will be conversations with licensed therapists. Yes, there will be a blog series, a podcast series, a video series. But more than anything, it's a recognition that this gets to take priority in the conversations we have, and we normalize conversations about mental health for parents and other caregivers who, quite frankly, oftentimes struggle with the responsibilities they have. Guilt, shame, overwork, financial stress, sibling stress, and all those things are part of this, and they impact mental health. And how could they not?
Well, a lot of grief too, grieving for what could have been. Just this isn't a part of the game plan. I see how it's come full circle for our family and how we're taking this situation that was so traumatic and making it be a light for not only our family, but for other families. But I think the longevity of what families living with a medically complex child. And oh, by the way, our audience should know that this is one of the first programs that we are spreading further than just epilepsy. We're inviting families that are dealing with children that may not have epilepsy, but that have medically complex children, because that's how important that we see this program and the need to address mental health is.
Well, I think anytime you're going to fight for the life of your child, you're going to have effects on your mental health as a family, both children and parents, as well as the child that's going through care and treatment.
I agree.
Yeah, I'm interested. I've been part of Team Grease now for a little while, and I've had the privilege of observing a day in the life, if you will, during different seasons. And I've always been really awestruck and impressed by how even you guys keep it. I wasn't there for
Smoke
the
and mirrors,
early
buddy.
days. No, I mean that sincerely.
I know.
Given the magnitude of what you guys deal with, I've been so just impressed and inspired by the evenness that you guys deal with all of this. And I know I'm catching you guys years after the emergency crisis of when you guys first learned that Mickie was falling behind her colleagues, right? Her peers, if you will. And you, Mama Bear Instinct, said, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. And then you guys went on this journey to find out what was wrong when you weren't getting answers. You weren't getting responses that kind of matched your maternal instinct and your paternal instinct for caring for your child.
Yeah.
So I wonder, if we can go back to those early days, what was it like for you guys from a mental health perspective? Certainly we know you guys were in full crisis mode in terms of, we have to save our child's life. We have to do everything we can. But what was going on from a mental health perspective for each of you?
Like, yeah, I've got 2 points on that I think are interesting, and I'm going to take them out of order. But the second point, which I'll address first, was Mickey's second birthday party. And so, as some of you know, Mickie had brain surgery the day before her first birthday, and her first seizure was at about 3 months. So if you figure that out, we're now at 21 months post first seizure. And we're at her second birthday party, and she's walking and she's just smiling. And, Kristie's decorated the house wonderfully. There's silver and pink balloons everywhere. And we were raising money for the very first time for Chalk Children's Hospital for rocking chairs. And after the effort of putting a party on, I think we both exhaled for the very first time in 21 months. And I think that was the first moment that I identified that we really were suffering from a PTSD, and didn't really see it in the 21 months from first seizure to second birthday. And so I think that's a really important thing to realize is, you know, you may not know what's going on in your own life. And so having a support network and having people that you trust who are willing to be vulnerable and honest with you and share their experience of you and what's going on. Like, hey, for instance, hey, Dario, I don't experience you the way I always do. What's going on, man? And slowing down enough to do self-care and to listen. So
Yeah.
that's the first one. And then if you go further back on a mental health piece and a couple piece, and I thought about this just earlier today, is, Mickie had her first seizure at 3 months, and then it was drug after drug, process after process, treatment after treatment, all the way to brain surgery, basically at her first birthday. And for me, once we were in the process, I was like, tick, 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 make it happen. But she's screaming inside. Her mommy alarm is just going off and just, it's driving her nuts. And I'm like, honey, we've got to stay the course. We got to just keep doing what the doctor says and be on time. And, I was as rigid and as mechanized as possibly could be with the time of medicine and the time of the shots or whatever it was. And that's how I dealt with it. Was I'm going to be my best at making sure Mickie gets the care she needs at the exact time, in the exact manner, at the exact, milliliters of shot injections or CCs that she needs. And mom's in the process saying inside, what are you saying inside the whole time?
My daughter's gonna die, and I have to save my daughter's life. And he was my rock, and I think one of the most important reasons why he's on this podcast is I don't think the father's perspective is shared enough. And he really was my rock in that time. I needed that. Okay, this is the game plan, very militaristic. He's 25-year veteran of the Air Force. So it came naturally to him to control what he could. But he also listened to me, and my maternal instinct was that, okay, and then what? Because I knew in my soul that whatever protocol we were on was going to stop working. And so I was like looking forward, like, what's the next thing? So I think it just hit me that focusing on the child and doing what we could for our daughter came naturally to us, because you're just going to do whatever you can. But the focus on your self-care, your own self-care, you just put that on the back burner. You're so much in survival mode that it's like almost minute to minute, especially when the child is seizing constantly, and then they have a seizure, and like tears are right here, like could come right now for me, because I'm thinking about the seizures will come and you just get terrorized all over again. Oh my gosh, this medication isn't working. You're trying to get a hold of the neurologist, if they'll even answer you. That's why we have a medical advisory board that was handpicked with the best epileptologists across the country, because they will answer our calls and they will get those children urgently to the highest level of care possible for diagnosis and treatment. And that's not the case in a lot of different hospitals and a lot of different settings. And it's not because they don't have good intentions, but for various different reasons, whether it's training or that hospital, or they're overwhelmed, or there's a 6-month waiting list. And what we do at Mickie's Miracles is prioritize and get those children urgently to those doctors. But I think the focus on self was not even something that was in my purview at all, until I had a moment. We had brought Mickie back from, I mean, there are a lot of moments along the way. I remember specifically, this was when, Facebook was out at the time, 10 years ago, but I purposely didn't put anything out on social media. I was like, I need all my focus on my daughter. So it was just this little network of our family and friends that knew about what we were going through, this crisis. And I have a lot of moments where I had breakdowns at the hospital, breakdowns with the doctors, breakdowns after they told us that brain surgery. But one moment that really hit me as far as PTSD moment was us bringing Mickie home from the hospital, and the terror and fright of like, is the seizure going to come back? She's been seizure free for 10 years since her brain surgery, praise God. But at that moment, I remember we came back and I went into uber perfectionist mode. In particular, I need to make everything I could control, the house, everything be perfect. And I remember my 18-month-old son, Preston, had all these throw pillows on the couch that he had messed up, and I barked at him. And I recognized immediately what I did and broke down crying. And I go, what is this about? And the thought came to me that if everything's perfect, my daughter won't die. She won't have another seizure. And that's when I knew that I needed to get help. And I started, very simply, I started interviewing babysitters. Found the most amazing babysitter named Sam Strong. Her brother is actually Carson Strong, who just tried out for the NFL. And we developed an amazing bond. Mickie was just this little thing, still with stitches in her head, and she would just babysit like twice a week so I could go do a yoga class. Anything to like find my center and just have a breath, because there was just chaos and there was no calm. And that, I think, is one of the most important things to teach parents, is that in a moment, whether you're in the hospital room and the nurse comes in and says, hey, go take a walk outside, go get a bite to eat with your husband, and you don't want to do that because you want to be there for every minute, you don't recognize long term how finding that center, finding the calm will actually help you make better decisions for your child, will actually help you be a better parent to not only the medically complex child, but also the other siblings. You talk about guilt, you're feeling so guilty about leaving your child. It doesn't end with the brain surgery for us. It was every 3 months we went back to the hospital for more monitoring to make sure that the medication, or that there was no recurrence of seizures for Michaela. So we just get Mickie into a routine, and now we're ripped from out of that routine, out of PT, OT, speech, and we're ripped away from our 18-month-old child, because that was what was in the best interest of Mickie. And I'm grateful for that. But it was very difficult for all of us to get back to some sense of normalcy. And I think that we need to recognize families and caregivers, and this is all caregivers, whether it's a caregiving for your grandfather or husband with dementia, or a baby with epilepsy or autism, or whatever that they're facing. Needing to have that moment to breathe and to have self-care is just so critical.
Well,
It's amazing, the testimony you just offered. And, I've been able to witness the kind of the consequences of how you approach all of that, and having worked with Mickie's Miracles. And I would say my experience of you is starting Mickie's Miracles was in part a way to control something else, meaning how you showed up for other families and how you provided a resource for other families who didn't have the information that you had. And in some ways, it was almost a coping.
It was complete
I
a
could be
coping
completely off, but it's a different way to control, right? And to serve and to get beyond yourself so that you could basically use the experience you had with Mickie to serve others. And I know it was a result of prayer, and it was a result of reflection and meditation and asking God to use you and the experience in a way that could really empower other families. But to put it simply, it was partly a mental health coping mechanism.
Absolutely. And it came up for me recently, I would say a few years ago, after our big gala in Orange County, where it just hit me that yes, I was using it as a form of therapy, but it was a coping mechanism. And I literally just started therapy about 2 months ago. I mean, I'm being very, very vulnerable and honest right now. I felt like I was okay. And we went to Chalk Children's Hospital for a follow-up appointment in June, and all the feelings, all the terror, all the trauma came back. And I realized how much I've used giving back because it feels so good, and it gives you the sense of purpose. And I cannot tell you how much, and cannot stress how much that it's important to, at least for me, to give back made all of this horribleness and fear and trauma worth something. And it gave it meaning, and it helped me move forward, especially when you're dealing with families that don't have the results that Michaela has, that are still in the fight with seizures on a daily, hourly, minute by minute basis almost. You have your sense of gratitude just increases 100-fold. But I still have stuff that I have to deal with, and I get to deal with. Really finding a way to process my trauma. And again, this 10 years in, we just had a conversation yesterday with her epileptologist. And the reason why I went to therapy was because that meeting, went into it with a conversation with all the doctors saying she's been 10 years seizure free. We should have a discussion about taking her off anti-seizure medications. And we come out of it 3 days later, out of the long-term video monitoring, with the information that she has spikes in her brain up to 50 times a night that could become seizures if not controlled, and a discussion of medicine changes and handling that. And it was so it's traumatizing. The fear that of side effects, and the fear of the seizures coming back, and if something happens to her at night. We talk all the time with families that lose their child to seizures at sleep time, and that really affects her cognitive development, because that's when the brain is downloading all the information they've learned. So that helps her grow and develop and become independent. So it's this big circle. And as you can tell, I'm still learning how to deal with it. And I think
I remember even taking it away from something as significant as a transition in care and transition in protocol, and dealing with the fact that Michaela is now 10, she'll be 11 soon, she'll be 12 soon, she'll start developing into, a young woman, and, that's a whole separate set of issues, and then transition to adulthood and what happens then. And I mean, my daughter's going to college, and she's not medically complex, and I'm a disaster. She's going to be dealing with a different world. She's first time away from home for a significant period of time. She's not going to have mom there. She's not going to have dad there. She's in a city pretty far away from us.
Yep.
And she doesn't have medical issues that can complicate, that mental health stress of, how do I protect my daughter, and all the threats that are out there, let alone if she, was challenged in that way. And I remember Kristie and Gabe, when we were in Orange County for what really is a routine monitoring session during COVID, and only one of you could go in.
Oh,
And I remember, like, Kristie, your stress level, and I mean, you had a post-traumatic stress response. I mean, I saw it in your body. I mean, you were different. I had always experienced you even, and certainly, emotional responses to the families we deal with, and some of the heartbreak that we unfortunately get to process and walk our families through it and support them through. But it was really the first time that I saw you shaken, and this was 9 years in, or 8 years into the journey,
yeah.
And I have to say, like, I was just, wow, this is more far reaching than just getting Michaela the right care and or dealing with this like it's another routine visit. I mean, you were shook,
Yeah.
and she was doing well,
Yeah.
I think that's
and so
the case.
many, like you said, so many of the families that we get to deal with and have the honor of representing and advocating for, their child doesn't have the same kind of trajectory and recovery and seizure-free experience. And I know part of that response for you is almost like the guilt of, oh wow, my child gets to recover, and other moms and dads, and I get emotional just thinking about it as if it were my child, their children don't have that same experience. So I mean, there's just like the gamut of emotions and responses to this that impact, how we show up from a mental health perspective. And we know that the better we are as parents in terms of mental health wellness, the better the recovery environment is for the child. So it's not just impacting our ability to show up for ourselves, but our ability to provide an environment that's going to be healing, that's going to be nurturing, that's going to be supportive of, the development of a child. Gabe, what's your experience on all this? From my experience of you, obviously with your background, you're much more dot the I, cross the T, checklist. But I've got to experience some of the emotional pieces of you that aren't always there, but are beneath the surface. How do you deal with it? How do how do you process it?
Yeah, great question. I think there's a couple of things, and one that comes up is nothing prepared us for the duration of the journey, right? The fact that we're 10 years post seizure now, um, and going back again in February 23, we just booked her next long-term monitoring, right? So this
Yeah.
journey doesn't really end, and I think it's naive of me to have ever thought it would. And then I think if you apply that over to our other kids, well, the journey never ends as a parent, regardless of what your child's going through, whether they're
Mm,
completely typical and developing, well, then you've got other things you're working on and developing with them. If you've got a medically compromised child, same journey, just different challenges and different opportunities to show up for your kiddo. So I think that's been a really interesting awareness that hadn't ever really come up until recently. It's like at some point you think, well, aren't we done with this? Can we move on? And this is here to stay. And so there's a new perspective on that of, it's an ultra marathon. It's not even a marathon, right? So we're in there with Mickie. And then I think the other thing that's super interesting, which actually was an interesting little uh, wrinkle in our relationship, was I was doing burpees in the hospital
oh,
as she's going through
Oh,
birthing pains with Michaela. And it's because
Men do not do that ever.
it's because I just started a CrossFit competition with a dear friend of mine. But what's super interesting is when we talk about self-care is when Mickie had her seizure, I was probably in the best shape of my life
Mm.
as I'd ever been as, over 30 years old. So go back in your teens and 20s, maybe better, but in my 30s and since then, the day Mickie had her first seizure, I was literally in my peak of my physical fitness. And I hadn't thought about this till this conversation about self-care and having more of yourself to give, but I'm confident that that physical preparation carried me for the next 21 months.
Mhm.
And so,
Mm.
as we think about, there are parents on here or people listening that maybe don't have a child with epilepsy or some other medical condition, it's today's the day to prepare for what you don't know may come tomorrow. And so I think that, what we did and what I was able to do in that time really prepared me unknowingly for the physical strains and the stresses and the bad eating and the hospital food and the
Totally.
extra Coke Zeros and all that stuff along the way. But so I think the physical fitness piece is certainly true.
Sleep deprivation.
You use the term team grease,
Mm.
and that's actually a marriage tool we have, and that is we don't always see eye to eye, and sometimes we violently agree, where
Sometimes.
we just fail to communicate absolute agreement about something, and so I call that violent agreement. And there's sort of that tipping point where a discussion or a conversation or whatever is just about ready to become not nice. And we have a phrase we like to use, and that is we're on the same team.
Yeah.
And that will de-escalate 2 or 3 steps and let us reconnect and give us a moment to be like, wait a second,
What's the most important thing?
yeah, and what we're talking about probably isn't that big a deal, certainly not to be elevated to the point we are. So I think that's another tool that we've used that anybody can use. And you can even use it if maybe you're not in the best situation with your partner, is when you're talking about your kid or your children, you are on the same team. And just creating a space for a new opportunity, a new direction in that conversation, or just for somebody to relent or surrender or say I'm sorry or whatever.
And I agree. And I think that's with providers. I mean, we have I have gone toe to toe with some epileptologists that, I mean, I vehemently did not like them. And now I have their cell phone numbers and we connect when we're at the epilepsy conferences. And I consider them my friends now. They saw me at my worst. And as we talk to parents, it's all so upsetting that it is really easy to project this fear, pain, anger onto individuals who have chosen a career path to help. And I'm not saying they always make good decisions, but I think what I think Gabe, I really appreciate what he was saying is entering all these situations as a blank slate, a start again, whether it's with your mate, whether it's with your parent. There's grandparents involved and aunts and uncles, and everybody has their opinions. And not everybody not everybody is in the doctor's appointment. So, I mean, I would be enraged when I had friends go, really, brain surgery? Is that necessary? I mean, that's pretty, dramatic. And I'm like, my daughter's gonna die. Like, this is our only shot. Or the hospital that said the MRI was normal when it wasn't, and that malformation on her brain that was caught at Chalk Children's was the reason why my daughter's here, because they removed 3 lobes of her brain to stop her epilepsy. We could be mad, we could sue, we could do all these things, but what would that solve? For our family, we decided, as you mentioned earlier, to pray the most dangerous prayer that you can pray which is God use me. And
Mhm.
we're here today because I prayed that after I had that breakdown, and said, got so vulnerable with my God and said, why did this happen? Why us? Why did our daughter go through this? She had stitches. She was, doing well at the time, but every day sitting there in fear of a seizure coming back. Like, why did this happen? And then the words came out, God used me. And the next day started the journey where all these therapists that were coming and working on with Mickie started just telling me about the other patients that they had. Oh, I have this family and they have a child with epilepsy and they don't know what to do. And I just said, send them my way. And this started as an ad hoc kitchen table telephone hotline that just became so busy and so big that, okay, this is a need that needs to be there. And I think that was very helpful for me. This was my therapy, but 10 years later, I realize it's still not enough, that I need to be one-on-one with a therapist and get help. And I think it's so important. That's different for everybody, but it is so important that you create that village, you create that, it could be your parents, it could be a grandparent, it could be a good friend where, they support you in your journey for self-care. And because there's a lot of families that are doing this all by themselves, they have other children. If they don't, that was the reason why we started Mickey's Miracles. I mean, we spoke English, we were educated, meaning we didn't have challenges of not being able to communicate clearly with a doctor.
We had good healthcare.
We had good health care. We had all this support, and we almost lost our daughter. So I just kept thinking, what about the families that don't have any of this?
Yeah.
Handling it.
Well, I think that's one of the big wins for Mickey's Miracles and the service that's provided is that not only do we have the relationship with the hospitals and the providers, is we also know the bedside manner and the care profile and the level of expertise in the facility. So the parents that come through Mickey's Miracles and end up in a treatment facility can have confidence that uh, that they're in the best place. And at that point,
Yeah.
they can exhale a little bit and listen a little more and team a little more and partner more and on the care for the child. We're so defensive and so fearful and so afraid of hope being snatched away one more time that almost everybody and everything becomes an enemy. And that's no way to go into a collaborative, highly complex diagnostic process around, a brain disorder, or neurological disorder, because it's a lot of art in the diagnosis and treatment of epilepsy. And so it takes, a lot of folks and a lot of experience. And in some of these teams, you have hundreds of years of neurological experience come together to diagnose your child and to create a proper treatment plan. And, and that doesn't happen at every facility, but it does the places that Mickey's Miracles sends children.
When Kristie was sharing about how Mickey's came together, there was obviously a very acute need for someone to help make these families aware of the resources available to them and to advocate like heck for them to respond urgently and to be able to overcome any barrier that would got between that child being at the highest level of care to get the best possible diagnosis and the best treatment opportunity. And here we are 10 years later, and I feel like this is not that we're always to focus on priority, we'll always be getting families urgently to the level for not just the high possible treatment. But I feel like where we are today, it's a new movement from Mickey's Miracles and addresses something that has been largely unaddressed and immediately ignored for these parents and these caregivers. In many ways ignored for these parents and caregivers. Yeah, and I think this is a good opportunity to recognize our sponsor, because without Jazz Pharmaceuticals, this program, and it's a comprehensive program. We're just seeing one component of it. I mean, we're going to have basically bi-weekly Zoom sessions that will include parents and caregivers with a licensed mental health provider. It won't be therapy, of course. It won't be a replacement for therapy, but it'll be an opportunity to tackle some of these challenges in a practical way, right? And have opportunities for practical application, practical exercises that can support families in their mental health journey. We're going to have a full video series that's going to be available for everyone on our website. And, but without folks like Jazz Pharmaceuticals, this conversation, can't reach as far as it's going to reach. So, I'm very grateful for them, for their partnership. And I'm even more grateful, honestly, for the leadership that you guys really put forth, and how well you listen to our community. We get to work with these families, and like you said early on, Gabe, we triage them. Like, what do we need to do? How do we get this child into? We just had the conversation this week where a mom was, borderline hysterical, and the child had been passed along, and no facility had taken ownership over that child, and we got to comfort her. We got to provide support, both from a recommended course of action perspective and an emotional support perspective.
Yes.
And I have to say, as the leaders of, Mickie's Miracles, I'm just grateful that you guys listen to the needs of our families, so well, and that we can adapt to what they need. And there's no doubt in my mind that the Care for Caregivers mental health program is something they need desperately right now. And not just people in our community, but beyond our community. And I'm just thankful for our partners and for your collective vision in putting this forward and executing what's going to be something that I think is going to help not just the parents, but the children who get to experience their parents more healthy and more balanced and more even, so that they have an opportunity to be in an environment like the Team Greece environment.
Thank you, Dario. And thank you for all the hard work that you've put into creating this program, getting partners. I would ask the audience, whether you're a medical professional listening, whether you're a family listening, the most powerful testimony is firsthand testimony. And sharing this podcast and this series, and all the information that's going to be coming out over the next 6 months and beyond of this program, getting the word out is our greatest ask of this community. Because when you understand and when you can relate, or you can connect with a family that is having this, you don't know what you're doing. Meaning, what Gabe said earlier, just asking, taking the pause to say, are you okay? Something doesn't seem right. Can I help? Can we help? And this program will really address a lot of those issues. Again, not a replacement for therapy, but we will have professionals on here that work on a daily basis with families as ours, as we've discussed today, to really help them get on the right direction. And I think sharing this will be pivotal in it expanding beyond the 6 months. And again, thank you, Jazz Pharmaceuticals. Thank you, Dario, for your support and partnership. Baby, thank you for just being on this journey with me. I thought about this earlier. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I wouldn't trade this experience and all the pain for anything. Because we're here today, and I know that we're helping families, and Mickie's Miracles is in the fight with these families, and that is the greatest honor of my life, beyond being his wife and being the mom to my 3 kids, to create a nonprofit that can help so many that are lost and desperate. And like you said yesterday with the family, that the mother that we talked to, that conversation changed everything. And and we empowered her to do it. We're not fishing for these families. We're teaching them how to fish, and we make connections, and we provide programming like Mickie's, like this program, the Caring for Caregivers program. But we really want to empower families to do that for themselves. And I just think everybody who has been a part of this journey with Gabe and I, with Mickie's Miracles, with the epilepsy community, and anybody who has a medically complex child, or anybody who's a caregiver, we're here for you. And I truly believe that this program will be helpful. So
I
with
think we end it
that,
there. Yeah, that's like drop mic, you know.
well, in that case, we'll conclude this episode of the Pediatric Epilepsy Podcast. We're so excited to share just a little bit of the Care for Caregivers mental health program. We are excited for it to launch today, and for all the amazing opportunities that I think we're going to provide families. With that, have a blessed day, and we look forward to the next episode.
Cool.